Today, I spoke with Caroline Gaskin, a returning guest, and we, just like last time, got into all things homeopathy and menopause. And a lot of it is about, come on, people, we need to talk about it. So please do check out Caroline. I hope you enjoyed the episode. 2, 1. Hello, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. The sun's out, and that always makes you feel a bit better. Good to see you.
Yeah, no, it's the sun is out, and I've got to be honest, I'm pleased the sun's out because the last couple of days have been a bit miserable. And but you were away, weren't you, recently? Was it Isle of Man or
No, Isle of Lundy, but yeah,
Isle of London?
you're absolutely right. I was there for a week doing conservation work, which was most interesting.
Sure.
I spent a day digging a hole. I've never spent a day digging a trench, actually. And I took a photo, and someone said that's a very neat trench. I was like, oh, okay.
That's the thing, actually. I back in the day, I did manual labour, and if you can dig a straight trench, you'll be amazed how appreciated people are of that.
It was really interesting. Then we began to discover some ancient pottery, so it got really interesting.
Oh, nice. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And I knew what the pottery was as well, because I'd done something called mudlarking on the shores of the Thames with a good friend of mine about a year and a half ago. We went down on New Year's Day and found all these little pipe stems and some little pottery shards. And when I posted, we were talking about social media recently, when I posted my findings from mudlarking on on Instagram, and said something about it, the person who wrote the book about mudlarking said, or somebody commented anyway, and said, that is slipware. It's a certain type of combed slipware. So when I dug this piece up on Lundy, I was able to say to the warden, this is actually quite an interesting piece of pottery. And it could be from as early as, I think it's the 1600s. So you never know what happens when you dig a trench.
No, many a body has been found that way, as it turns out.
Yeah, we did come across bones, but we decided they were all sheep.
So actually, just like you were saying, before we were, as we were setting up to do this, we were talking about how social media helps us get that message across. And that one of the things that since our last podcast is how many people have kind of got in touch via a third party with questions about the menopause. And again, something we actually briefly talked about last time was how difficult it is that people feel talking about it, and kind of what resources are out there that they can talk about it. Especially, like, one of the questions that was given to me specifically was, I didn't get the answers I wanted from the GP, so where do I go next?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think there's lots of layers of that conversation, aren't there? So first off, do we feel comfortable talking about what's happening to us? So with menopause, it's like, and one of the things that I kind of open on my menopause group with, I have a Facebook group. One of the things I opened with was a quote I wrote somewhere about, not really knowing what's happening. And does this mean that I'm going to lose my attractiveness, my womanliness, it's just questions come up about your sexuality, about your capabilities as a mother. All sorts of issues come up, which are really quite private. And what does it mean to not have those things? And it might have been a difficult journey for you actually coming to those things, so if we talk about motherhood, obviously that could be, did I want to have kids? Did I have kids? Was it difficult having kids? Did I decide not to have kids? All those things come up with a massive melting pot of things that we mostly don't talk about, so I was I'm in the middle of reading a book. When you read a book and you're like, really don't want to do anything else, I just want to read the book.
Yeah, I do.
So I'm reading I think the title is Close, 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 Music, 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 Boys, Boys, Boys by Viv Albertine. And I just can't put it down. You know, I'm amazed I made it to the podcast, to be honest. Because she's talking about a time when I was growing up, you know, when music was changing massively. But, you know, what she's talking about in that, which I find actually one of the most interesting and intimate parts of the book, is the unfolding of women's sexuality, if you like, in the 1970s, and how we were coming from actually quite a repressed place, and that it was very difficult to own certain things. We just didn't know we could own certain things. Yeah. So I'm finding the book fascinating from that point of view. And so there's this aspect of women's lives and men's, but where we come into our fertility and our sexuality, and then you get to menopause and suddenly all of that is changing. And for some women that can change very, very quickly. So things like, you know, loss of libido, or suddenly finding hair in places that you've been trying not to have hair for a long time, or I don't know, all sorts of things that you question, you know. So for me, just a little anecdotal thing was at some point during perimenopause, this period of time before menopause, it can go on for sort of 10 years of subtle changes. I went through a deep period, in probably only a few weeks, of mourning, you know, because I wasn't going to be feeding any more babies. How did that come up for me? You know, before a woman starts to, when women have our breasts have got milk in and we're about to feed our new baby. I don't know if you've had kids. I have to ask you, do you have kids? No. So when you go...
And just for the record, I'm 47 and 48 this year. I don't think I'll be having kids. And I'm one of those men...
Not too late for a guy, though. It's a bit late for a woman.
That's a very big, I think, a very significant difference, without trying to get off that part of the topic, is that's a significant difference between men and women. Is most
massive.
Likely, you know, that there's men that can father in their 70s. But just when people ask me, I've never wanted children. It's never been something I've wanted.
Yeah.
You know.
But I think, you know, that is a huge thing. Your relationship to your fertility comes up for airing, you know, and what happened during that particular period of time is, I don't know who your listeners are, but so what often happens to women, what often happens to women before their periods is what we might label PMS or PMT, premenstrual tension, premenstrual syndrome, whatever comes into that vast bucket.
I did a podcast on the menstrual cycle with a menstrual cycle coach, and Brilliant. She mentioned about a book that's something to do with the 4 seasons or something, and it's to look at the, and I'm sorry because I'm being very clumsy because I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was to look at the menstrual cycle in 4 parts or 4 seasons.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I mean, one of the things I do in my menopause workshop, my Balancing Your Hormones workshop, is remind women, kind of a bit like a biology lesson, of how we're really meant to be and which symptoms we might be experiencing that could be helped with some support. And of course, my chosen option as a homeopathic natural health practitioner is the natural health option. And I've always taken that kind of road myself and support many women through all of those things, you know, whatever our choices are. So it might be that you're taking some kind of HRT or you're on the pill and it hasn't fixed all the issues that you'd like it to fix. And so there are lots of natural health options that can help with that. And I just wanted to get that in. But to come back to my own symptoms, before periods, often women will say, my breasts feel heavy, my breasts feel full, and that way I know my period's coming. And actually that is a symptom which I would, as a practitioner, like to support women in addressing, because where might that go without it being attended to if we let it? And what I'm saying is, if we don't look after our breast health, we all know that that is one of the primary cancers for women. So it's a sign that we need to do a bit of tweaking as far as I'm concerned. And there's lots of amazing things we can do, from skin brushing to liver cleanses, that will help reduce breast problems for women. And I, of course, like to throw in some homeopathy. But for me, what was happening was, instead of that being before my period, it was coming up in the 3rd week of my cycle, which we could take to be the autumn if we're going to talk about the seasons. We talk about our bleed coming on the first day of the cycle, and then the bleed happens, which I believe should be 3 to 4 days and not 7, because if we were out in the wild on the plains, we're prey if we're bleeding. So it should be a very short and comfortable and not debilitating situation, which of course for most women it is long, it is uncomfortable and debilitating. So clearly there's work to do. And then in the summer, or we come towards the summer, we come towards fruition, the second week of the cycle, during which we should become fertile. And becoming fertile means, and I'm just going to put it there, we are more lubricated, we feel like it. There's actually a subtle drop in our temperature. The cervix, interestingly, took me like 100 years, not 100 years, I'm not that old, but took me many years to understand that the cervix actually moves position during the cycle, and the texture of the cervix changes. So the cervix becomes, not surprisingly, it becomes more open and receptive when we're fertile. And the other thing that happens, which I think is absolutely fascinating, is interior pH balance changes. So we go from being slightly acid for most of the cycle to less acid, and not surprisingly, that is receptive to the sperm. I know.
The thing that's popped in my head is like the mood.
Exactly. So there's all sorts of education we could have, that being fertile, we are more receptive, we're more up for it, and then the autumn period, things we move into, either we've made baby and we're going to carry it to fruition, or we haven't, and we're going to the wall of the womb thickens up and we slough that off at the period. So during this third week of the cycle, my breasts were full, and I was like, what is going on? Clearly it was perimenopause is the answer, but I was like, what is going on? Why do I feel like this now, a whole week before my period? And then it would stop, and I'd have the week before my period, and my period would start. So I was like, that's really weird. In the past I've had this feeling just before my period. So I tuned into, what does this feel like? And what I realized it felt like was just before you're going to feed a baby, and your breasts get full, and you're like, where's that baby? I need to feed it. So otherwise it gets very uncomfortable. And so, that's how you need to feed the baby. So this was the feeling that was coming up for me. And so in that third week of my cycle, in my perimenopausal years, I was just like, wow, I'm mourning the fact that I'm not going to feed any more babies. And I loved feeding my babies because it was the ultimate, it feels, what we call it, the letdown reflex. It's just such a relief. It's like you're feeding the baby calms, that feeling of fullness dissipates, and everybody's happy. And there's this difference, when you feed a baby is crying, or excuse me, baby needs to feed, and sometimes they look a bit pinched. I mean, it's amazing. You feed a baby and then they look full and content, and you realize that there are these natural rhythms, and we are so out of touch with them. That to come back to how we started this bit is that we don't know how to talk about the stuff that's happening to us. We go to our GP, and neither does the GP know how to talk to us about this stuff that's happening to us, because we've got so medicalized, we've got so compartmentalized, and most of the GPs still, and I know there are amazing people like Dr. Louise Newson who are changing this, most of the GPs don't know the difference between depression and you feeling like something is changing and it's perimenopause. And so many women, if the GP is listening, get antidepressants, and that's not the solution. The problem is imbalanced hormones.
It is, isn't it? Because it's interesting as well, because often with the GPs, they're going to follow the trend that's in media. So when something becomes a talking point and everyone's talking about it, and I remember in the 90s it became a big thing that people shouldn't be ashamed of being depressed. They should go and take their antidepressants. And now we have Mental Health Month, Mental Health Day, Mental Health Awareness Week, and all of these things. But with that became, well, we'll give you some antidepressants. And I've started to see or notice that GPs are now starting to stop that trend a little bit. But like you said, one of the things that you and I discussed last time, and I've discussed in previous podcasts, is the lack of knowledge and the lack of awareness about how I was about to say what the menopause is, but everybody thinks that's probably a good way to say it. People think they know what the menopause is, and then when the menopause starts happening, everyone's like, "I don't know what's wrong with me."
Yeah.
And
also women might actually, and this often happens, really not realize themselves that is what's going on, and that it takes a partner, a girlfriend, daughter, maybe mum, if you have that relationship with your mum, and she went through menopause herself, kind of being open to the conversation about change, which is often not the case, so this is new territory. But often for women, it's like, and I'm hearing this more and more actually, which is great. So the education, the news is getting out there.
yeah.
It's, hey, mum, sister, girlfriend, maybe this is menopause. And that can be the trigger, that acknowledgement, that mirror, that recognition that perhaps you're going through this.
Because this is something else that just occurred to me as well is, and I'm not trying to put a perspective from a men's point of view, but I do think it offers a difference for balance, right? Mm-hmm. As men get older, we know when something's not right because we don't get an erection. It's not a feeling. Do you know what I mean? It's not a feeling. It
just doesn't happen.
Yeah, you wake up in the morning, you're pointing in the wrong direction because you're normally staring up at me as soon as I wake up in the morning. And when that doesn't happen, you're tired, stressed, or your testosterone's dropping. It is as subtle as being hit in the face with a breeze block.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no escaping it. There's no denying it. You're like, literally, something's not up.
Yeah,
so something
exactly.
And that's how simple it is for men. So when there's no clear markers, there's nothing that blatantly, when you wake up in the morning, is banging on the mirror saying, "Oi, have you noticed?" It's like, how do you start? How do you have a conversation? How do you? And you said something earlier that was fascinating as well, because you said something along the emotions that come in about sexuality. Am I still attractive? Am I still desirable? Am I still functional? Am I still worthy? Do I have a place or a purpose now? Because I'm effectively starting to become infertile.
Yeah, exactly. And we are the only creatures on the planet, bar whales and a couple of fishes, who aren't fertile for the whole of our lives.
Yeah.
So for women at menopause, there is this huge question that comes up about worth, and it might be very basic to talk about fertility in relation to worth, but I'm sure that will raise a lot of hackles to think about it like that. But there is an aspect of survival of the species, and an aspect of us that we really haven't looked at till now is what happens beyond being fertile. What happens beyond being fertile is post-menopause. And that period of time is something that we are not really yet talking about. And I usually say the things that we need to talk about as 3 Bs post-menopause, which is bones, bladder, and brain. And those are the areas that we need to look after in our society. And that brings me back really to your conversation about depression. And when you mentioned that about mental health. And I remember meeting and reading an article many years ago by Patrick Holford, and he put it very clearly that the studies that there are that show that at the root of depression, or part of the depression conversation, is a lack of minerals. And so for brains, bladder, and bones, particularly bones, we'll be talking about mineral wealth. So what comes up again at menopause is a need to nurture, is the need to nourish, is a need to replenish and restore, because we are very good in our culture at being demineralized because there aren't the nutrients in the food. So it's looking at the pathways by which we absorb nutrients that is fundamental. So to come back to, when you said about the GP not listening or not hearing, a really useful thing to know and to understand is that all the GP can really do is give you some blood tests. And I would go for that if you're feeling that you're out of sorts and you are wondering if it's perimenopause, is go to your GP and ask to have your bloods done. But your blood tests, having your bloods done is such a kind of movable feast. When I compare clients' blood tests from last year to this year, I'll be going, well, last year they tested everything. This year they've just tested a third of that. So I can only make comparisons between what's happened this year and a third of what they showed us last year. That's very common. So you do need to go with a little bit of knowledge to your GP and say, I'd like to have my blood test done because I think I'm perimenopausal and I would like to know my hormonal status. And then they will look at hormones. But that said, I would also say, please look at my thyroid if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling a bit low emotionally, if your bowel is slow, constipation being an issue, or IBS, or dry skin's cropping up, because these could indicate that the thyroid is low, and that is common at menopause. So those are the things that the GP could test for if they are thinking, oh, well, I'll do some tests. Or if you go with some knowledge and ask them. But I will say that blood tests aren't the best measure, because if something is showing up on your blood, in your bloods, then it really is a time to take action. And that there are other tests you could do which show way before it being evident in your blood that there is an issue. The other thing that I'm going to throw in actually is anemia. Blood tests are good at showing whether you are low in iron. And if you're low in iron, I would also be looking at other minerals generally. So just to say, beyond blood tests or the tests that the GP will do, which are blood tests, may or may not show that there is an issue. And I have many, many women coming to see me who show me that their thyroid is low, but their blood tests don't show that. And they'll say, well, my GP said my thyroid's fine. And I'm like, not from your symptoms. It is crashing. So other types of tests which you can go for that are useful, they're called hair mineral analysis tests, and they will show what your mineral wealth is like and whether you've got heavy metal toxins knocking about, things like aluminium.
Same tests they do to see if you've had cocaine, cannabis. No, that's where those, for court cases and stuff like that, that's what they use, because cocaine absolutely can stay on a hair strand or something for 6 months.
Yeah, and cocaine actually is an interesting one, because there are studies that show that it's one of the most difficult drugs to shift from your system when it comes to detox. So it's worth knowing that if you've been a bit of a cokehead in the past, you're going to need to do a lot of liver cleanses at menopause. Just putting that out there.
Well, I was going to say the amount of fathers over the years I've coached who are going through divorce, and they said the mother has demanded drug tests. How long do you think I need to be? And I was like, you haven't done any cocaine, have you? They were like, yeah. And I was just like, you're fucked. Because
it stays in the system.
Well, yeah, because cannabis, I think, like skunk cannabis and stuff, I think is in your system on a hair strand for about 3 months, give or take. It's different for everybody. But cocaine its markers are there for about 6 months in your hair.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We get in a whole other conversation. Yeah, and it's interesting. When I look at detox, it's like, oh well, does that change if we do a detox? We do need to individualized. So a lot of this conversation is about this, but hair mineral analysis tests are interesting. They'll show whether you've got lead, mercury, aluminium, cadmium knocking about, arsenic, this type of thing. And they'll show what your mineral wealth is. And that could be useful if you're feeling tired, depleted, etc. And then the other type of test, which is far more comprehensive, it's called the Dutch test. And that is done during testing your urine. And that will look at your cortisol, your adrenal hormones, your female hormones, your thyroid hormones, and gives a much better picture. And then the other type of test you can do is a saliva test over 24 hours. And again, that gives you a true hormone profile. And with that information, you're much better equipped to really know if you want to go down the test route. I personally think there are other ways. You're talking in a one-to-one situation, you're like, well, that's what's going on for me. Or a bit of education, you figure out what's going on for you. So there are options. The other type of test that I'll just mention that I've been using a lot recently is a microbiome test.
Okay.
So a microbiome test tests your gut flora, and they're very comprehensive. And if you go for a company or an individual, it costs more, obviously, to see an individual one-to-one setup, but you can just go and get the test. You want to go for a test where they have a chat with you afterwards, so that you've got a nutritionist that you talk to for 20 minutes or so as part of the test, or you see someone one-to-one. And what you'll get from that is an understanding that without the right flora in the gut, you won't be producing the right brain chemicals. So if you've got anxiety, for instance, it could be you haven't got the right bacteria in your gut. And anxiety is massive post-COVID. And of course, it really comes up perimenopause.
I mean, this is the thing, is I think that's difficult for people to understand. Interestingly, last week I did a podcast with a lady called Sharon, who is a hypnotherapist, and she specializes in easy birthing.
Nice.
And we got into the subject of anxiety, and we got into a subject you and I talked about last time, about the brain hasn't changed in 2 million years. It hasn't evolved. So we think, well, I'm fine, because we rationalize things. And you're like, no, we'll write a list of pros and cons, and we will rationalize things. But your subconscious isn't dealing with your rational thoughts. Your subconscious is shutting things down in your body because it doesn't feel correct. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's doing that to protect you. Sometimes it's doing that to warn you. But when we ignore it, your subconscious is focused purely on trying to save you. And it doesn't care weirdly, your subconscious doesn't care if in trying to save you, it will actually kill you. It will shut, and we were talking about this, like she was saying, there's a great example of, unfortunately, when that tsunami happened about sort of 12, 13 years ago, a lady...
2006, yeah?
Yeah, there was a lady... there was a lady who was mid-labour, and the subconscious kind of took over, the brain took over and shut down the labour. Both mother and child... Yeah, both mother and child survived, but literally she had to flee up a tree in the middle of labour and stopped giving birth.
That's incredible.
Our operating system is that powerful. And we forget that we're animals. We think, because you and I are doing a Zoom conversation, we're some highfalutin species that's above the hedgehog that walks across your lawn. It's like, no, you're no different. A mammal is a mammal, and our subconscious works on that level. It doesn't care. Like you and I were saying, like going back to that communication thing, your body doesn't care that you don't want to talk about it. It's like, no, I'm going to take you
shouting louder.
Well, it's like, this is going to happen, and we can walk down the street hand in hand, or I can drag you kicking and screaming. I know which one feels best, but it's up to you which way you go. But this is the direction we're going, because you're now starting your menopause.
Yeah, I think that's a great metaphor. I really like that. I can't help but be reminded of, you're talking about the women in labour, of a conversation I had many years ago he was a work colleague, and he was white Rastafarian, and his ex-partner and he had a child, and she was white, but he always told the story about her second child, and she was with a black guy, and she didn't quite know whether the child was his, my friends, or the new guy that she started seeing. So she wasn't sure what color the baby was going to be. And it was a much, much longer labor because she was hung on not knowing, and she always says that's why this labor was 18 hours and my first child was 6, very interesting.
But this is what I mean, because people get upset and offended about these conversations, but it's like your subconscious.
But it's a fact. That was a fact.
But this is what I mean.
Saw it.
Yeah, but this is what I mean, and it's like you can be as upset as you want about talking about the menopause. Your body doesn't give a shit. It literally doesn't care. And Sharon was telling me that she has clients that come to her because they can't fall pregnant, but the tests show that everything's fine. And she said, when you get them under hypnosis, it turns out they're anxious about being good parents. So their body's like, well, if you're anxious about being good parents, it's obviously that maybe there's a famine coming, maybe there's a flood coming. It's not a good time to have kids. So your body just, even though everything's supposed to be working, your body doesn't let you become, I don't know. I stopped because I suddenly realised I don't understand. I just know that the body will say, no, you're not having kids. But I think
there's many things. I mean, that whole, the analogy of our interior being over acid, and not welcoming the sperm. I mean, that's actually a massive conversation right there. And you just reminded me of a very good friend of mine. She's a yoga teacher, Lynn Murphy, and she will often, in her prenatal yoga classes, just know instinctively if there is an issue for the woman, a woman in her class, around a previous sexual experience, which is going to hold her up in the birth process. So absolutely, working through what holds us back is fundamental when it comes to hormonal change. And I think that these issues come up for us hormonally at these points of change, and it's puberty, it's pregnancy, it's menopause, and they come up as an opportunity for healing ultimately. And so, I love the birth hypnotherapy. I have a few friends who work with that, and I have a colleague, Katrina Armour Brown, who works with hypnosis at menopause for a similar reason, because experience can be what holds us back, from making that change, from making that transition, from moving into a new version, if you like, of ourselves. And that can be a version of yourself that you love. And it might be that you've never loved yourself, or you found it difficult to, or you've always loved yourself, but you're going to transition into something that's new. And it's about, reducing the fear around that. And, there's so much more information out there and around about menopause at the moment. It can frustrate me that the natural health solution isn't aired enough. And that can be everything from a bit of grounding, knowing the difference between restorative yoga and Ashtanga yoga, for instance, and perhaps restorative yoga is a better choice at this period of time. It doesn't mean to say that these symptoms aren't going to shift. I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot at the moment is this conversation or perception that because you've got brain fog right now, or you might have brain fog in menopause, you need to medicalize it. That, to my mind, is absolute rubbish. And I would love to be able to counter that with saying, well, look, there's lots of amazing things that we can do, which are low cost, low impact environmentally, and just easy to do on an everyday basis. And they start with things that are as simple as, dry skin brushing with a natural bristle brush before your shower. That's men and women. Great thing to be doing. To have a shower, to do a cold shower afterwards, and suddenly you feel brighter, clearer. Doing a bit of mindful practice in the morning, doing a little bit of meditation, taking some fresh air and sunshine if we've got it, but fresh air before 12. I have to discipline myself to do that. And I'm sure you're the same. It's like to get out of the house rather than plumb into emails before 12. And I will feel better and I'll sleep better at the end of the day.
I occasionally rant about this in my videos because and anybody that follows me on Instagram will see if I'm not on shift at my main job, I work out in my garden. I have a little gym area in my garden and it has a tin roof on it. And there's pictures of me like at 6 o'clock in the morning and it's snowing. I'm still working out. And yeah. And one of the things I rant about, and excuse my language, but I point out, if you think I fucking enjoy this every single morning at 6 o'clock when it's pissing down with rain and it's cold, you're a fucking idiot. I don't enjoy it at all. I bloody hate it. But I also get fat very easily because I'm not that controlled with what I eat. I'm going through a bit of you're a bit too fat diet at the moment. So I've gone the other way and I'm like barely eating anything because I've realized like, Jesus, you can't keep upsizing your clothes. You don't earn enough money to keep doing that for the rest of your life. But I never stop working out. But it's not just about weight control. I do it for my mobility. I do it for my agility. I do it for my lymphatic system, which I think is one of the most underspoken health
absolutely
things you can do. Is the reason moving is so important is because that, for people that aren't aware of this, we all know we have the blood in our body, which is controlled by your lungs and your heart. Your heart beats faster, it pushes blood around your body. You also have an almost symmetrical system called the lymphatic system, but the lymphatic system doesn't have a heart to pump it. It relies on you moving, and movement allows the lymphatic system to pump liquid. I don't know what the correct name for the liquid is called.
Lymph. It's just called lymph.
Lymph around your body through your lymph nodes, and that's actually what carries toxins away and keeps your body clean. And so when you're sat there eating, drinking, whatever, doing a Netflix binge for an entire weekend,
or sat on Zoom all week, can I add?
Yeah, exactly. Any of those things, you literally are like sitting in like stagnant water. Like if you imagine a pond where it's just stagnant and there's no movement in it anymore, that's what happens to your lymph system. Whereas when you move on a daily basis, and it doesn't have to be like a marathon, just a half-hour vigorous walk is perfect, literally perfect. And then it's more like a clean flowing stream.
Definitely. So that's why that's my
little rant over.
And I would add the dry skin brushing into that with a natural bristle brush before the shower, because you're stimulating your lymph system. Exactly. And you brush from your extremities towards the heart, because that's where the major lymph ducts are, and they then dump that into the bloodstream, goes back to the liver for cleansing. So I always say to people, make sure you hydrate as well, otherwise the liver will go, oh, thanks for all that, and you'll get constipated. So there's a whole conversation around that.
But going back to what you said, is there's so many things you can do for free.
Yeah, totally. Free and low cost, and also low impact environmentally. Yeah. Let's not forget that drugs are a big part of the petrochemical industry. People aren't talking about this. And if we are going to talk about reducing our impact on the planet, then let's start with a bit of dry skin brushing first thing in the morning. Why not?
I'd love to know how many of those climate activists are medicated.
Do you know what? It was an interesting question. I remember there was a pub in Islington. I believe it's the Duke of Cambridge, and it was one of the first. We do all organic, and it's run by a guy. What's he called? Guy from Riverford, and his wife. Yeah, an Indian lady. No, he's called Guy, and I can't remember anyway. But from Riverford, and his wife runs it. And I remember, being curious about some of the posters that were up on the poster board, or the notice board. Is the word I'm looking for. And I was interested, because some of them were congruent with the organic concept and some of them weren't, and I at that point, just reading that notice board, I thought, wow, there's a lot of work to do here within the movement of climate change. That if you are reaching for the medication of any form, you want to be asking questions about that. It's almost, we can ask questions politically, we can ask questions spiritually, the church is being exposed. Can we ask questions about our health medically at that level? We're really on a very much the cusp of beginning to ask about where our medicine really comes from and the true cost of that.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had the conversation, about animal testing. That's a sort of marginalized conversation for us. Horrors when we start to lift the lid on that. And I think because it's the lifting the lid on things that we allow, every day in order to arrive at a freaking deodorant. I'm sorry.
But this is it. So here's my take on animal testing, right? And I have no skin in this game, no pun intended, sort of thing. But we as a society have to accept one or two things. If you're not going to test on animals, you have to test on humans without liability for the consequences.
Yeah, that's why I like homeopathy, because at the end of the day, we do provings on humans, and it's just such a different approach.
But do you know what I mean? Is the reason people started testing on animals is because they couldn't sue, and what was once a necessity, and because people forget, animal testing started sort of before they could once upon a time you could only examine dead human bodies, right? And there just actually wasn't enough supply. And so anatomy classes were done with animals so that people could understand the basic medicine that we take for granted today. Now, as a medicine evolved, so did the need for practicing, and how do we discover what we can and can't do. And in about the last probably about 70 years, I forget how old I am, but it was about the 40s and the 50s that they started testing chemicals, beauty products and stuff like that, and certain medicines. It kind of went just from basic anatomy to understand the body to let's learn how the body reacts to these treatments. And in doing that, we've cured thousands of viruses, diseases, most of cancer, leukemia research, and all of that was done on live animals. Because you have to know how they respond in real time and if a drug works. Now, I'm not defending it. I'm saying as a society, we have to accept one of two things. If we do not test on animals, we can only test on live humans. And if you are going to do that, you cannot then sue people because it goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand the logistics. I still find it completely abhorrent and choose a form of medicine that's not been tested in that way.
But that's what I'm saying. If we're going to do this,
and say that's a privilege, but it's not a privilege. I chose to educate myself, but it's a constant rigorous thing. I cannot tell you whether the perfume I'm wearing today was tested or not, and I really, it's like I need to drill down on. It's a constant reminder to drill down on those things. To come back to. When it comes
to most things like perfumes, and my apologies, I genuinely didn't mean to over talk on you there. When it comes to things like perfumes and stuff like that, we can be pretty certain today that because of perfumes as a base hasn't changed much in the last 50, 60 years. So everything that's been tested on is pretty much been done. But going back to something you've been talking about before, naturally, right? We didn't evolve as a species with chemicals. So how did we manage up until about 200 years ago? Because people right through time have lived into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. The idea that the average age was 30 is absolute bullshit. They're taking statistics to
Yeah.
suit an argument. What went wrong is if you broke a leg or you got injured, you would bleed out because an ambulance couldn't come. But
Yeah.
there's very little evidence of things like cancer. There's no evidence of things like diabetes. There's so many things that, like, yeah, if a different person who'd never entered your community before brought in a new type of cold, that was probably going to wipe most of you out. That was how nature worked. But as a species and the subspecies, we've been around 2 million years. Well, the Industrial Revolution's only 300 years.
I
So,
know. It's
so
so recent.
yeah. And if you look at when health conditions started to become problematic, it was around the time that we started farming, and we gave up that nomadic life of walking and stuff like that.
I don't know about that. I think when we look back to, I was reading a really interesting blog. Actually, I would say it's more recently than that. I would say things come out of farming, which is interesting. I think farming allows us to live in this part of the world that you and I are in, which is Northern Europe. I think that it is because if we think about what survives through the winter and food, we would have to get into being able to store food from the summer through the winter in order to survive. And as we move further north, and we look at, say, hibernation during the winter and slowing the body down and eating foods which burn sort of slower burning fuel, if you like. There's lots of conversation around that. But I read this fascinating thing recently looking at the Russia-Ukraine crisis and really looking at that part of the world. And won't go into it too much, but it was a fascinating study about massive shifts in culturally what we were doing, and what was, there were actually big civilizations set up based on farming, that we can live in bigger civilizations because of farming. If we're hunter-gatherers, we have to be more spread out over a wider range. So we can only come together in clumps because of evolving farming. And at that point, it doesn't necessarily mean that we were less healthy. It's really it's the Industrial Revolution that has advanced stuff. So when you look at the diseases, when you do see cancers, and you look back, it's not that cancer never existed, prior to that. We have the word canker, we see it come up, but it's more related to other conditions. And then we really only see the increase in that as we Industrial Revolution, and what we teach in homeopathy is what we call miasms, is the family history. And we really get into stuff like epigenetics. But when we look at one of these miasms, these grouped diseases, if you like, and we look at what came out of the Industrial Revolution, I describe it as we took young people, under the age of 8, out of the fields, out of the fresh air. We took them into the factories. They ran around under the machines, sorting stuff out, breathing in any of the effluvia. Was it fluff from a weaving machine, or was it, more chemical? Started to breathe that in from an early age when the lungs weren't fully developed. The lungs develop from the age of 8 to 14 to 16. It's when we grow into our full height and the lungs reach their full capacity. And it's during that period of time, we took kids and put them into factories, and we starved them of light, of food, and of spiritual, playful nourishment. And the end result of that was a disease which we call consumption, tuberculosis. People were consumed by something other than fresh air, sunshine, and good food. And guess what? We got tuberculosis. And when you look at tuberculosis as a disease and the rate, you go up to Haworth and you look in the churchyard. I don't know if you've ever been, but it's where the Brontes grew up. And it's like you just see all these gravestones, 18, 24 young people, just about reaching maturity and then dying of consumption. And that's the Industrial Revolution. And when you add in chemicals to that, guess what you get? You get cancers, So we are the result of our environment. 100%. We're doing the best we can to survive it, basically.
Yeah, but it's like you say, it's important because going back to that, that's what kind of what I meant when I said it was about the time we started farming that we started to have problems.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I did this pointless fact on a radio show a couple of weeks ago that I do on a Thursday.
I like that. I must listen.
Yeah. Well, it's a dance show for a client that I work for, but in the middle of his like house techno show, I do a pointless fact, and they really are pointless, and they vary. But one of them I mentioned is I did population, and it wasn't until about 18 something or whatever that we got to 1 billion people in the population of the Earth.
Mm.
And from 18, and basically about the last 250 years, we've gone from 1 billion
1 to 7
and they
something.
and they reckon possibly by the end of 2023 we'll be at 8 billion.
8 billion. Wow.
It's taken us just over 200 years. So, and that's
you can
why
understand the fast advance, the panic, like the collective panic about providing enough food, can't you?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It's wired into us. Is there enough food to go around? And this is, when it comes to dieting, losing weight and gaining weight, it's like, is there enough food to go around?
That book, I think I told you about that the first time we spoke. That book I'd been listening to, Why We Eat, and in brackets Too Much. It's because your brain is hardwired, whether you like it or not. And he talks about dieting, and he was a clinician that works in a practice that does gastric bands and stuff. He says, what people don't understand is, to a degree, again, we're going back to the subconscious and how the body reacts, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
You can have every good intention in the world, but if your body feels like it's going to go hungry, it's going to make you eat.
Yeah.
It doesn't care what you feel. It's just like, yeah. And again, when you start, like you and I were talking, when you get cravings for something, that's not always your mind playing up. I have a golden rule. If I'm craving something for more than 24 hours, I go and eat it. And it doesn't matter if it's, weirdly at the moment, I've been craving.
Go on, what are you craving?
Oranges.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. Usually it'll be a pizza. I'll crave a pizza or I'll crave chocolate. But at the moment, the only thing I seem to have cravings for is oranges.
Is oranges. Do you know what? That the difference between an orange and an organic orange can be huge. But I love blood oranges. I love it when it's the time of year when they come in.
I was really lucky. You and I have gone so off track, but I was really lucky a few years ago, about 20 years ago. I helped my uncle do a driving job, and we had to go from the Salisbury or Shaftesbury down to Valencia, and we had to do it between we had to do it between between Boxing Day and New Year's Eve. We had to get down there and back in that time. But when we got down there, the guy that we were dropping off all this furniture to owned about 50 acres of orange groves, and they were all ready for picking. And I've never had oranges off the tree. And
they're amazing.
I cannot begin to describe how different they taste.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to go. That's like one of those things that you just want to go and do, isn't it? I want to go to Valencia at that time of year and eat oranges.
Honestly, it's the middle of winter. I didn't realise that that's actually almost their harvesting time. And oranges straight off the tree is the sweetest.
Something else.
It is. It genuinely. I mean, we took like 2 big bags home. She said, "You can take as much as you want." It's like I've got 50 acres to pick. And if I ever had a lottery ambition, it would be to have some facility where I could grow fresh oranges and stuff like that. Because is a different world.
Yeah. I was at a friend's in Salina, a very good friend of mine, and I was there. I'm guessing it's April. Might be wrong. Could be September. I'd actually have to look it up. It's the time of year when the orange trees in her front garden were blossoming, and the neroli, the scent of the orange blossom flower, is beautiful, really amazing. So let's just bring that right back to menopause.
Well, one of the things
I was going to throw in a few flowers for you, for your listeners.
But actually, one of the things we were talking about pre the actually recorded the podcast is you're putting together a crib sheet.
Yes, so I'll do that for you. I'll put together a crib sheet of useful resources that are free, low cost, for your listeners. And so just we'll put a little note at the end of how to contact me, a landing page or whatever, and then we can send that out. And just because many women come to see me one-to-one, and the reason I started to do talks and workshops and create a point of information other than one-to-one sessions is because I can say the same thing to every woman that comes in. Start with these simple measures, do these for a month or two, then come back and see me for the icing on the cake that is homeopathy or herbs or supplements or whatever, because there are many very simple things that you can do at home that could be all you need to do. And what if all you need to do is establish some simple routines, perhaps to add in a few extra things. One of the things that I often say is that, and I think I might have said this on the last podcast, so forgive me if I did, but is that women are very good at taking things away. Oh, I must stop doing X, Y, and Z in order to get to there. And it's quite a human conversation. It's quite a contemporary conversation, but women are far better at it than men. Must stop that in order to do that. And so often what we need to do at menopause is actually add in things. And then so if you find that, for instance, you are wanting to eat more sugary food, more carbs, and you're frustrated because it's like, why do I want to eat these things? It shows me that your blood sugar is out of balance. And actually what might be needed is to add in some magnesium, take an Epsom salt bath, use a magnesium spray. Or it might be that you need to add in greens to your diet every day. And when you eat those more bitter flavors of the greens, suddenly you don't want to eat the sweet flavors because it's like the bitter counteracts the sweet. So just, it can be very simple things like that. And a lot of it is just adding some stuff in. So that's really why I started to do lower cost things like my workshop, to create a Facebook group, to just have some available resources, do some YouTube clips, so that you're just like, oh, could be doing that. And then things change,
Where can people find your Facebook group? What's it called?
It's called Managing Menopause Naturally. So you should just find it from that. We could put the link actually on the crib sheet. So I'll do that.
And I'll put the link in the description as well.
Cool. Thank you. Oh, so oranges. I was just wanted to mention, there's great, like essential oils, pure essential oils are actually a very low cost solution. We could be making up a very simple massage oil, using oils like geranium, which help balance hormones, which help calm the nervous system. There's some great solutions which are readily available, easy to access, and don't cost the earth in more ways than one.
Just before we finish, there's something I'd like to go back to and it's really for people that are listening, because you and I are both therapists, and one of the key things I think almost all therapists agree on is getting people to communicate.
Yes.
And you and I will agree that not every therapist fits everybody's needs. Sometimes it's square pegs and round holes. But when all of us communicate, there'll always be somebody that can help you. But for me, one of the hardest things, and sometimes I get asked, like, if I have a special gift, what is it? And that's when I'm listening to people, like when I'm talking one-to-one with a client, that pain point is always the thing you don't tell me. And that's the one thing I hear. I can listen to somebody for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just talking. And I promise you, it's always what you don't say that I notice and remember. And what I also know, which I kind of learned over the years, is I can't ask you about it there and then. Because the reason you haven't said it in the middle of a sentence, and I can't explain it. It's like you were saying about that lady who does yoga, who just seems to know. She just seems to be in tune or has an instinct for that.
Yeah.
When I'm listening, and there will be something that you should have said or you haven't said, and I realise that it's like there's a sentence that hasn't No, it just, out of all the other sentences or the whole, whatever you're talking about, it's just like, that just stands out glaringly to me. And the only thing I've ever learned is not to question it in myself, right? So just allow it to take its own time and do its own thing. And then I'll leave it for a few minutes, sometimes even another session. Because if I come back to you immediately, you'll defend it. But if I let somebody go off so that it kind of disappears from back into their subconscious, I can go back and say, when you were saying that, what was that about? Why didn't you do that? Or what did you mean? Or what didn't you say? It's all. I'm making it sound really clumsy now, trying to explain it, but it is all context to where you are in that conversation, and that is what opens them up to then talk about what's really bothering them, or what's really holding them back, or why they really have self-doubt or low self-esteem. That will be the pain point that happened at some point in their life that was actually literally became life defining. And I'll give you a personal reference, because I did this on a Vinnie Shulman breakthrough day, which is a hypnotherapy day where he takes you back on timeline therapy through hypnosis.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And as you can imagine, I went in there as an experienced therapist and stuff like that, and had this good idea about where all my problems stemmed from. And I couldn't have been more wrong. And one of the things that stood out, that was like a massive, massive thing in my life, which I had actually forgotten about until this memory reoccurred, is when I was about 10 years old, I was dating this girl, if you can date at 10. I was a 10 or 11, because the following year we went to secondary school. And we had kind of split up, as 10, 11-year-olds do. We went to different schools, and I bumped into somebody I knew. And he was telling me, and I'm not going to say this girl's name, because who knows, this podcast might get listened to one day, right? This guy Stephen was telling me that this girl had been telling everyone I couldn't kiss. And in the middle of that memory, when I relived it under hypnosis, I was destroyed, and I felt so humiliated. And on some weird level, I'd carried that around with me as an adult, that this embarrassment of not being able to kiss, or kiss properly. And I don't even know if I could or couldn't. Just for the record, I've had no complaints since, right? But just restore my ego a second there. But it's like, what 10 or 11, when I rationalized it afterwards, it's like, what 10 or 11-year-old knows how to kiss anyway, boy or girl? Do you know what I mean? There's, at that age, there was nothing sexual. There was, it's just like, and there's no of that learning that different partners make you feel different about the same thing. You can kiss one partner and it's not the same as maybe a partner you have later in life. The chemistry, and there's energy, and there's different stages of your life. But at 10, 11 years old, what on earth does anybody know about kissing? And the weird thing is, it's not something that I witnessed. It was something that was third party. He was telling me about something he had heard. So how wrong had that story potentially got by the time I heard it? For all I know, she wasn't saying anything horrible about me. But Chinese whispers, by the time it got to me, my interpretation of it, but I just, weirdly, it was 30 odd years later, and I was just like, wow, that's still in my subconscious from being a child.
Yeah. I think it's really fascinating, isn't it? What, thanks for sharing that, because I think what came up for me is one's relationship to the challenge that you were set in that hypnotherapy session. And I would be like, I'm like, my response to that is, I need to go and do that. Like, I've done that sort of thing loads of times, and it's like, it's layers of an onion or whatever, is this sense of, peeling back and uncovering that. And so I hear that, and I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. And I've been thinking recently about family constellation, and again, this is part of menopause, part of maturing, part of growing into something else, is someone else. The next phase is addressing those things. I'm listening to you thinking, need to go and have a session. Had a great session back in March with somebody, did a bit of work on something, and it's a process. And I remember driving on the M4 with my son to see very good friends in Bristol, and I was listening to Ian Watson on a podcast, and he said, this was early in my training, healing is a process, not an event. And I said to Tom, my son, can you write that down? And he goes, what? I said, write that down. Listening to a tape, is that long ago. Yeah. And healing is a process, not an event, and I'm engaged in the process, and I'm interested in that, and I want to be here on this planet at this point in time, in this consciousness, kind of peeling back the layers. That's the way I'm wired. But many people would listen to what you've said, or perhaps somebody said, oh, have you thought about doing that? They might be, well, there's nothing wrong with me. What do you mean? It's like, what's your relationship to that kind of challenge or concept about change? And I think that is a big thing that comes up, at menopause, at this time of change. It's called the change. What is your relationship to dealing with change and that aha moment that happens in the therapist space? Well,
because the thing that really, so one thing is, I try to share as many things in my life where it's quite embarrassing, because I'd be a hypocrite if I asked people to communicate and then don't share my own sort of things that have held me up in life. But what really astounded me, and it astounded me at the time to the point that I was quite dismissive of it. And then on the journey home, and a few days later, and I was just like, I literally, up until that moment, had forgotten that I even had, that she was even my girlfriend.
Yeah.
I'd like that sort of summer holidays that we were together, and before that, I think we were together for a few months. But it was just like, wow, I couldn't, if you'd have asked me, like, can you remember all your girlfriends? She would never have appeared on that list.
Yeah.
Because I'd completely forgotten who she was. I'd forgotten about the guy Stephen telling me about it. And I suddenly remembered all of these names, and I even now remember where we were sitting on some swings where we used to hang around in a park. But that's about all I remember from a 6-month relationship. Is about 5 minutes in a park sitting on swings. I don't ever remember any other conversation with her. I don't ever remember being anywhere. But I met her at a disco, and we'd gone to that disco over 100 times probably. I'd known her for a couple of years. But the only actual memory I have is us kissing on the swings. And that certainly wasn't the first time we kissed. I do remember we were enthusiastic. But it's amazing that when I went into a hypnotic state with Vinnie Shawman at one of his breakthrough days, that's where it took me. A place that if you had asked me, I wouldn't have remembered.
Yeah. But that is it's, I think remembering is a very interesting word, isn't it? Because members are parts, and it's remembering, it's putting back together a part which became broken for a reason, or fractured or forgotten, whatever the label is for a particular situation. But it's sort of like, what didn't, and I often think this about things like brain fog, and memory. It's like, maybe there's something you don't want to remember, so I've forgotten everything. Well, it's like maybe, and so there can be a big aspect. And I talked about this. One of the things I do, actually, little resources, I try every Monday at 6. You were saying about regular stuff, to do 10-minute Meno on Instagram. And I just talk about different things. Last week I talked about brain fog and trauma, and how if there's trauma in the way, and it could be, a previous period of time in your life when you were anxious, that comes up as the point from which you don't remember, that memory becomes an issue. You don't want to remember that. You don't want to connect with that, reconnecting can be painful as well. And I think that's something that you and I both hold space for, is that it takes, bravery and courage. And I guess that's what I'm saying about going into the therapeutic space, is I've got an issue, I I'm anxious, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling low. That is your body trying to say, we need to do something about it. And the challenge is what? And do I have the courage? Do I have the support? And I'm sure you're the same as me when someone comes in and they have got to that place of recognition that there needs to be change, and acknowledgement that there is a process to go through, that there's recognition of that, bravery to share the story, courage to share the story, and an acknowledgement that reconnecting isn't always pain-free, because you disconnected because you were in pain.
Because, like I say, if I look at this and I'll try and tie this up to a possibility with menopause, right?
Yeah.
If I look at that now as a 47-year-old male today, who's, just for the record, a confident kisser, right? I feel the need to defend that now. But I'm 47. I'm 47 years old. Yeah. But I'm 47 years old. I'm outgoing. I'm confident. I have a podcast. I can talk about things openly, right? So, but my rational brain, going back to what we were saying earlier, my rational brain is like, that's stupid. It doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
But when I go under a hypnotic state, you can either call it your inner child, if we want to go, it's my inner child, it's my subconscious, but it created a pain point, which, whether I was aware of it or not, would have carried through to every relationship I ever had, and vice versa. If you're a young child, a female, and you're perhaps seeing an aunt, a mum go through the menopause, you might not be aware of any emotional feelings you have towards that you witnessed 20, 30, 40 years ago. But when it comes to your time, it's like we're saying, your subconscious doesn't care whether you're coming along hand in hand for a nice little walk, or I'm going to drag you down kicking and screaming. You're coming on the journey anyway. And for me, it just exposes the resources that are available, but how little we give credence to these things that could be quite important. And like I said, because I'm a 47-year-old male, I can rationalize that as the most stupid thing going. What 10, 11-year-olds know how to kiss, have relationships. There's no level of intimacy at that age, not compared to the intimacy on par with being an actual adult in a physical relationship where you're living with somebody for a long time, And so we
shy away from that a lot of the time as well, not actually doing it, but the intimacy, within relationship.
Exactly. But what would
comes up, doesn't it?
If you're a young girl, or if you're a girl that's about to go into puberty and start a menstrual cycle, what are you experiencing with women going through the menopause, or about to start the menopause? Their behaviours, their attitudes, the conversations they're not having, and the conversations they are having. Is there suddenly an erratic behaviour? And like I said, when I look at that as a standalone moment, there's so many things around that just makes no sense. Why should that in any way, shape or form be a pain point for me? But it was. Whether I agree with it, whether I make fun of it, whether I can even today understand why that mattered, it doesn't matter. On a deep level that I'm not in touch with, it was there and was always there. But it like you were saying earlier about the onion layers. And it is like an echo. The layers are almost like an echo. It doesn't matter if you understand where the first sound came from. It still repeats itself. You just bury it under other experiences and probably attach other experiences as the cause. But when you get down to the root, the seed was different.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And I think also what comes out of that is not just attaching other experiences as the potential cause, but also that experience flavors the other experiences, or your expression in those places, or whatever. Is that, and I think it is subtle. And even coming back to looking at fertility that we were talking about earlier, the signs that we are fertile are subtle. So for women, it is often this subtlety that's coming up, and the more we talk about it, the more it is good to have someone say, perhaps that's menopause, and then to encourage a conversation and, some action taken. I put, somebody put something on, talking about something completely different, but on Facebook today. And, they said, oh, thankfully more and more people are waking up. And I said, well, recently, I found myself saying it. Yeah, it's one thing waking up. It's quite another getting out of bed, putting your feet on the floor, having a wash, getting changed and going out the front door and doing something about it.
Sometimes when I hear people say like they're waking up, and I there's a cynic in me that says, no, you're still seeing what you want to see. You're just justifying it better.
Yeah.
Waking up is, look from a menopause point of view, waking up is accepting the menopause is happening.
Exactly. And that's huge. It is huge.
Yeah.
Because everything in our society is geared towards youth, longevity in a kind of shiny, youthful kind of way. It doesn't see how we can
going back to what
gracefully or attach anything,
going back to what I was saying earlier about male erection. If you're a male of any age, right, apart, once you get into your 40s and 50s, it's slightly different. But if you regularly wake up and there's no erection, you actually have a problem.
Yeah.
That's not healthy. It means there's something wrong with your lifestyle. And
yeah.
But like I said, we're lucky in a sense because literally it's not standing up to attention.
It's much more graphic, basically.
As I said earlier, it literally is not staring you in the face anymore. Well, that's probably a good place to stop. And again, excellent. I will make sure all of the links are in the description, and the crib sheet when that comes, and the Facebook group. I'll get them all off you on email. And everybody, please, anybody listening to this, if you have any questions, just get in touch with either one of us. Just don't be silent.
Yeah, and feedback would be great. It was really good to have that feedback from the first session, even if it was third hand, that women are finding it difficult to find solution. And it's really a question of, continuing to share and open up the conversation and make it okay to be having that conversation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me back. It's been really great as ever. Talk around the houses. I like the bit about oranges.